Angela Kozine, and today I am going to be discussing the Scopes trial of 1925. Now, the subject of the trial was a high school teacher that was indicted for teaching the theory of evolution in his high school classroom. This went against the Butler Act, which was also passed in 1925, which outlawed any form of teaching evolution or anything that disagreed with the biblical notion of God creating the world. And it didn't at least start out as this romantic battle of ideals that America would eventually remember it as. It started out for much less interesting reasons. The people of Dayton, Tennessee were desperate to get some publicity. The population of their town had gone down by half since the turn of the century, and they were desperate to get people to notice them again, get some people to move there, and stimulate their economy. And they thought that this case of John Scopes being on trial for the teaching of evolution would be a good way to do this. Now, the law in Tennessee, the Butler Act, and then similar laws in other states, while they were there, they were hardly ever enforced. But the ACLU had offered to defend any teacher that taught evolution in their classroom in defiance of the Butler Act. So these people decided that this would be a good way to kind of put Dayton on the map. So John Scopes agreed to do this. He even coached some of his students to testify against him, and before long, according to the hopes of the people of Dayton, this became what has been talked about as a media circus. William Jennings Bryan was a very famous politician. He ran for president 3 times under the Democrat ticket, and he was a devout Presbyterian. And he joined the prosecution team. He was probably the most famous member, and once he did that, this is when this trial really took off and became the sensation that it was. And people began to see this trial as not just as a teacher fighting for his right to teach what he wanted in the classroom, or whether the state had the right to tell him what to teach, but it became, as a lot of people saw it, a fight for America's very soul. Would America stay a nation according to Christian principles and according to the literal interpretation of the Bible, or would we follow the more modernist trains of thought that were coming in society? This was the question that kind of hung on this trial, and people followed this quite voraciously. It became a huge sensation, probably the first big media trial sensation that we had in our century, in the 20th century. So this was a very big deal. Now, the judge encouraged the jury to decide this case on the grounds not of the merit of the law that he said, but the fact that the law had indeed been broken, and it was on this basis that the jury eventually came up with a guilty verdict for John Scopes. However, and even though it looked like a victory for the fundamentalists at the time, what they didn't anticipate, they were focused on the visible goal of winning the trial and winning the soul of America. But what happened was quite the opposite. They did indeed win the trial, but in the process, because of how the prosecution conducted itself, their lack of knowledge of the defense's arguments, and the defense's counter-arguments to the prosecution, the side of the fundamentalists came off looking as anti-intellectual, anti-science, anti-reason, and a host of other things that painted the church as something that was outdated and that was against progress, and this was a consequence of the trial that I don't think the church has ever really recovered from. which is very unfortunate because, as any apologist will tell you, faith and reason are not in any way at odds. They, in fact, go hand in hand. But this trial, the outcome, and how it was done really kind of gave that perception of the church and of faith that we have not entirely been able to undo. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.